Welcome to Fusion Sports webinar on the ROI of human performance programs in the military. My name is Jen Casson. I'm with Fusion Sport, and I'll be guiding today's conversation. Joining me today is retired Chief Master Sergeant Josh Smith and Dan Duffield, Global Solutions Consultant with Fusion Sport. So thank you guys so much for joining us today. Before we dive into the questions, I'd love to just start with some introductions. So Chief Smith, if you wouldn't mind starting us off, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Yeah, absolutely. And first off, thank you for having me. It's an honor. And I'm excited to hopefully bring some information to your listeners that will help them in their endeavors for their HP programs. Again, as you mentioned, I'm retired Chief Master Sergeant Josh Smith. I retired after 28 years in the Air Force. The first 20 years, I had the luxury to serve on the teams and be downrange pretty much anywhere in the world. I've been able to step foot in it at one place or another. But after 20 years, I was pretty busted up from all the different things, the training, the missions, just the lifestyle in general, because at that point I was on a rescue unit, which did not have POTF assets to it. So again, everything for us at that time was all on your own before POTF became across the board a program for all special operations. So in 2017, or probably in 2013, I ended up not wanting to retire at that point, which is my 20-year mark. I still wanted to give back, and so I went out to the schoolhouse out at Kirtland to be a superintendent out there. And that's where I was also going to use that time to hopefully heal myself to be able to possibly get back out and go back out to the teams. During that time, what I ended up realizing was we had been doing ourselves and our team, our younger guys, the injustice by putting them through all these different things that I was going through and they were still going through, because we, at that point, were not learning from our mistakes. And I really got more into the human performance side. After about 3 years of working with some people out of my own pocket there in Albuquerque, I was back to be able to do PT tests into my 20s and when I was doing my 20s. So, I really became more passionate on the HP and what can we provide to our younger generation coming through, to where when they retire after 20 plus years, they don't feel like we do currently. In 2017, I was asked to come out and develop a program here in San Antonio, which was a Special Warfare's preparatory program. We were having a huge issue with attrition. Some of our programs, it was less than 8% were making it. And so what we wanted to do is design a program. Colonel Stanger asked me to work with the team, design a program as if my son or my daughter decided to come to me and ask to be a PJ. So we created this 9-week program. A lot of it was based off of the Great Lakes program, that the SEALs preparatory program, which they've been running at that point for about 10 years. So we had a lot of great lessons learned. We brought those down. And one of the things that I had noticed was there wasn't a lot of technology and true database systems that were in place up at the Great Lakes location. And I figured, with us being Air Force, we preach technology. Let's see what's out there and what can we do to implement as much technology into our program as possible and see if that would give us a better outcome. So working with multiple companies to include Fusion Sport, I had the ability to, find a company here locally, GPS Guardian Premier Solutions, that was able to be contracted to my program, and they focused purely on finding the best technology and the best databases to be able to ingest all this data, but allow us to actually utilize true data in real-time format to make changes to our programs. So I did that for about 3 years. Got it stood up. We got the technology and the database out to the whole entire pipeline within our AHTC program. And that could be as early as 12 months for some of our career fields, to where our PJs have a 3-year pipeline. So now we have a complete holistic look at them from the day that they showed up to BMT to the day they graduated and got their parade prior to going to the teams. In 2019, I was asked to come in and stand up DoD's first human performance group and 2 supporting squadrons. So I had the ability to go in there and provide them some feedback from prior stand-up of units in the past. And then I was asked if I would be the senior enlisted manager for the human performance squadron which was the first of its kind within DoD. I did that for about 2 years. And then in June of 21, I finally decided that my time was done in the Air Force and that I was going to retire. And I did. And from there, I kind of moved into the industrial side and working with companies such as Fusion Sport and other organizations within DoD, both the United States and overseas, to help them, really look at how can we see what their problem set is, and then how can we optimize that problem set using technology and databases to get after that.
Great, thank you. Like that, yeah, I'm really excited to hear all of your perspective today with that very rich background. Dan, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I've been at Fusion Sport close to 10 years now, and worked mainly as a human performance consultant across my time. Had a few different titles in that space, but my experience started out in sport. I began in Australia and worked with Australian Football, Rugby League, Rugby Union, and the Australian Institute of Sport, and kind of just began to understand what the challenges were from a human performance perspective in that space. A lot of data collection technology, even in sport, was in its infancy at that time, and Smarterbase and athlete management systems were kind of really just getting stood up in a lot of these organizations. I then moved to the UK and spent 18 months over there, again working in a number of different sports, from English football to cricket, and then also some of the performing arts spaces. And then after another short stint in Australia, where I actually spent a little bit of time working with the Australian military on a few projects and started to dip my toe in the military space. I came over to the US here and began working a lot in the military and trying to help solve some of these problem sets that the Chief has already alluded to. One of the things that I've been able to bring into that space is all those years of sports experience and the things that, again, we learned, lessons learned from what worked, what didn't work. We've been able to take some of that and bring that into the military world, as well as I've had to learn a lot about the different logistic challenges that the military faces, and the biggest one being the sheer ratios of service members to support staff is very different to athletes to support staff in the world of sport. So again, I mainly work with the Smarterbase platform, and then have spent a lot of time working with Chief Smith. We've been probably thinking a little bit more high level now strategically about what does military as a whole need from a human performance standpoint. And I've certainly learned a lot from him. And the different groups we work with. So yeah, really happy to chat a bit more on this topic today, as I think it is a big piece moving forward.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I know even just Dan in our conversations, you've mentioned your conversations with Chief Smith, and I'm excited to just kind of share some of that to the extent that we can with a wider audience. So to start, I mean, in terms of human performance programs in the military, such as H2F, holistic health and fitness, for example, how would you define return on investment, and why is that even important? Chief Smith, let's start with you.
Well, one of the first things when it comes to ROI is we need to look at this and define what is the actual problems that we're trying to get. When we look at H2F, we look at POTF, we look at a lot of these different organizations that are trying to put these things, they're very, very broad terms. And when you look at this, it becomes a big challenge, because now you're trying to create an ROI off of something that's so strategically big that down at the ground level, it's very difficult to do. So one of the things that from lesson learned from the past 5 years of doing this is go back and break that into increment. You have the ultimate goal. Let's just say it's 10 years from now, but you have to realize that to get that 10-year goal, most people are going to go through 5 commanders, because every 2 years they change out. And that's a challenge in today's military, because every commander is told to innovate. Well, if he continues on a program that was started by his predecessor, well, then how is he truly innovating? So again, this is where those challenges come into of, we want that ultimate goal of we want a 90% deployment capability of all of our Army assets at any given point in time. Well, that's great. But now let's go back to that ROI and figure out, let's figure out what are those small problems that will ultimately get you the 90% and tie your ROIs to that. And those then become almost your yearly ROIs to lead up to the bigger one. Because looking at things in the past, and you see organizations that are putting, a large amount of money towards something, well, they're not seeing that ROI defined truly within their command or even within those couple of years to then be able to justify why do we need to continue this program for another 5-6 years to see the true ultimate ROI. So when I look at this, again, I go back to is, what is your ultimate goal and when do you want to get there? But then what does that timeline look like to get to that goal and tie your ROIs to each of those timeline statements? So that way you truly have that data to take back to leadership, to Congress, and say, hey, we are hitting the marks and we're on track to meet our ultimate goal in 2032 to have a 90% deployment rate of all of our assets. And to me, that's really the key there to creating a successful ROI program, is it actually breaking it down and stop focusing so much on the big picture.
Yeah. And Chief, just to follow on with that, I think Congress and Command, they understand, I think, what at a base level human performance can do, and it's why these initiatives are getting stood up. And they set these targets that you've mentioned, these big picture targets. I think the job of human performance programs, and like the one that you set up out at the Special Warfare Training Wing, one of the biggest challenges is taking those big goals and breaking them down into the detailed tactical pieces that you need to do in order to achieve that, and then be able to, again, represent back to leadership that we have implemented these things aligning with your targets, and here is how we're tracking towards those targets, and here's how we can potentially move quicker if we get more resourcing. And so ultimately what we're trying to do with return on investment is say, we're trying to achieve your targets. Here is how we've tactically planned how to achieve that. And here's what we need in order to either hit it on time or accelerate it if that's the desired outcome. So I definitely think the way you've put it there is really good. And I think sometimes we get a little bit lost in it's, we think too high level about it, but there is a lot of, on the ground tactical work that needs to be done as the building blocks to build towards those targets. And I think that's where return on investment data is really important, because it doesn't just show how we work towards the ultimate goal, but it shows why we need the resources at a tactical level to work toward those goals.
Which I think, Dan, you bring up, some good points. We've had quite a few discussions over the past year with different organizations, and it really does seem like a lot of these organizations, the way that they're structuring themselves is they're structuring themselves to get the staff, the facilities, and the equipment first. Then we'll look at a data management system. And as I've done this and watched this play out years ago, and I've tried to explain that is actually probably one of the worst ways to go about it, because if you at least put a basic structure of a database system on the front side, you can capture people through wellness forms in the morning. Who is working out? How long are they working out by self-reporting? Then when you start adding the coaches into it, now you can add the coaches' information. And then you start adding equipment and facilities. So by doing that, you literally at the very ground level, before you brought staff in, before you brought equipment in, before you built all these facilities, you know what an individual looked like, compared to now what they're doing. A lot of organizations are looking at, well, we'll do this in 3 to 5 years. Well, at that point, you lost all that return on investment capture of going, hey, prior to having coaches, prior to having these facilities, this is what an average individual will look like. Now they're starting from that level. So again, I go back to when we talk about it, using a system such as Smartabase, to capture at the earliest level, at least the minimum amount of stuff to then utilize and build upon. Because over 3 years, you might find out, looking at the data, maybe that facility isn't actually designed the way we thought it was, because we actually now have data to support it, versus we build the facility and now all of a sudden we get all this data, a couple years later, now we got to go back in and refurbish it. And I know it's a challenge. It's much easier to sell equipment. Leadership looks at it as one-time fees, with possible in 5 to 7 years refurbishment. But all this stuff is great until the time that you get called upon to Congress to go justify, where did $100 million worth of equipment money go? How many times is those facilities being used? And right now, everybody is building out these little Excel spreadsheets. It's only internal to their location. And so when you look at big commands and they have 5 or 6 or 7 of these facilities and 20,000 soldiers or airmen, then it goes into, it's very hard to collect that data. Where if you started with something like Smartabase at the beginning, it's literally a click on an icon and you instantly have, all right, how many people utilized the facility today and which units did it and how long were they, in there. And that's where that ROI really comes into play more than anything, is being able to go back and justify that 100K or 100 million that was put into facilities.
Yeah, you're right. I think for the teams that are in these human performance programs, I think anyone involved in it understands that if you get more resources and more technology and more facilities, you're going to have an impact. But ultimately, the leadership needs to see the actual impact. You can't just say to them, hey, if you give us more money, we're going to have more impact. You have to be able to show them from day one. To your point, I think data needs to be collected from day one. Okay, here is the resources you gave us for, if it's a pilot or for a 5-year program. Here's what we did in year 1 with the resources that we had. And then if you can show Congress and leadership that with what you've given us, we've had this much impact, and then also be able to almost extrapolate out a little bit and say, hey, if we can get more strength conditioning resources, maybe we can move the needle a little further on physical performance. Hey, we seem to be having an impact on things like suicide prevention because we've got these embedded resources like chaplains or psychologists or social workers. But again, I think in the human performance world, we know the impact that we can have because that's what we do. But we forget that people at the level of Congress, all the different things they have to consider across the military, and they're expected to be almost experts on. The reality is they can't. And so we need to give them data to arm them to make the right decisions to help us. So I look at it as the biggest job of return on investment right now for human performance programs is justifying their value. That is the biggest job that we have to do right now. And then, because if we can justify the value, we get the resources that we know that can be impactful. And then ultimately we will achieve the goals that have been set by Congress and leadership. But if we just keep taking the approach of build it and they will come, and not show the value, then we're either going to have what we've always had, or it's going to get taken away because we've got no data to show the value that we've added.
And I think that's going to be very important over the next 2 to 5 years as the economy is shifting, that we, if you do not have a program in place now, you're already probably a year or 2 behind the power curve. And you're going to have a hard time, I think, in about 2 to 3 years justifying really what your program has brought. Not saying it will be eliminated, but I think there's going to be some pretty strategic cuts coming down over the next couple of years. If organizations can't truly show, here is what we've gained, our time, our guys that are deployable has increased by 20%. And I know you have a few dashboards that you've built for the Air Force side of the house, that those are extremely strong. But if someone's trying to do this on an Excel over 10 or 11 different units, geographically separated, you're not going to be able to capture that data to the true intent and be able to truly speak to it, to the full value that data provides if you have a system such as Smartabase.
Yeah, you made another great point there, that I think over the next 2 to 5 years, these human performance programs are going to be asked to do more with less. And again, it's going to put even more and more pressure on these programs to show ROI because, the funding, everybody's going to be chasing funding for what they're trying to do. And for anything that's not showing value, that money could be pulled out from underneath them pretty quickly. So I think, this data piece and being able to visualize it and show the value is going to be more and more important for each of these human performance programs as we move forward.
Yeah, so I hear you guys saying kind of, at the beginning, and I'm assuming kind of at the start of the program, you want to take those high level goals and really break them down into something smaller that you can build over time and that you can tie ROI to. In addition to that kind of strategic work, also having the systems in place, even a rudimentary system to actually start capturing that data so that you can communicate that back and show that and track that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Which actually kind of leads perfectly into the next question, because I do want to get into more kind of specific examples of how data is being used to communicate ROI. So Dan, I'm going to turn this over to you, and I think you have kind of a dashboard to share with us, and you can just kind of walk us through and again, taking that idea of taking a big goal, breaking it down into smaller ones, and then actually being able to capture and show the data around that. So
yeah, definitely. So I think this is a really interesting space, and we as a company here at Fusion have really learned a lot from the groups that we've worked with, and I think we've learned to appreciate the value of visualizing the impacts against things like how much money is being spent, so that we can actually show we can help the human performance teams show their value. And so I try to say this to our consultants a lot, like a lot of what we're doing right now in the military is we're helping human performance programs justify their existence. And as a result, it'll keep technologies like Smarterbase in these places. So what I've got on screen, and Chief, I think you've seen visuals similar to this. And I will clarify, this is just an example that we've built for the purpose of today. It's not showing any real data, as we can't do that with the military customers we work with. But just to show you some examples of the way that we can visualize this data, we want to take even things as simple as encounters that human performance staff are having with service members, and compare those that are actually utilizing human performance resources. Are they getting better outcomes? That is, are they getting back quicker from injuries, or are we seeing less injuries, which means are we seeing more time in terms of mission ready versus not mission ready? And so even just looking at the first graph over here, and this is to Chief, your point earlier, the earlier you start collecting this data, as time goes on, 2, 3, 4 years into your program, these are the types of visuals where we can produce for people at the leadership level to say, hey, early on we had a HPO cost. So our team, to run our program, it was $150,000 a year. That's all we had. And maybe that's 2 or 3 staff and a little bit of technology. And so being able to compare that to what was the rate of mission ready versus not mission ready across the year at that point. And then as time went on, as we got more and more funding available, did we move the needle on some of these things? So did we see an increase in mission ready rates versus not mission ready? And so over time, again, this isn't necessarily real data, but this is reflective of what we're seeing with the groups that we're working with is as the HPO, the cost of the HPO teams increases because they're getting more resources, comparing that with the outcomes that are important to leadership of, mission readiness, we can actually justify the value of these programs. So I guess, Chief, I know you and I have looked at a few of these dashboards. Any comments from your side on that, or anything that you've seen at the training wing that you found valuable?
Yeah, a few things. One, even though you made the statement this isn't military data, I want to make sure that it's very clear that you could almost put military data over this and you're going to see the exact same results. So the results that you're seeing is based off of true true data coming off the military without specific given units and organizations. And that's what was really amazing when we saw this. When I saw this the first time with you, and then I saw Dr. Strang, his data from the psychology side, being able to capture that, and actually the psychologist and how many encounters that were actually increasing when they had a psychologist right there on the actual team itself to work with them on a daily basis. So, when we look at these things, I could provide the same thing when it comes to the amount of time that we have prior to our assets showing up, our HP assets showing up. Let's just say it was an average of 47 days and the individual was injured, to now the average is, say, 14 days that they're getting back out there. And that's for two reasons. One, we have a staff to capture injuries quicker, which means they're not as severe. So the candidates aren't holding their cards against their chest until it's so bad they no longer can take the pain. And then two is because we have the staff and the technology to re-implement them back into full-time training capability. What we're seeing is less of a re-injury rate going back in there as well. So again, having that ability, there's been some things in there that we've seen that we just never even thought of that have, one, provided us good ROI return stories and scenarios. But two is giving us the ability to actually go, okay, we have a high injury rate with, let's just say, shoulders on day 5 of training for this event. And looking at that why, going, you know what, we still want to maintain the event, but we're going to move it to day 3 instead. Because at that point they're a little more refreshed, they haven't been exhausted from the prior event. And then what we saw was injury rates on shoulders went down. So having that ability to actually take your courses and you lay them out, and you can do things such as injury rates and what day of training are those injury rates. And then you can start dissecting, going, okay, what do we do now? We know day 8 is our highest injury rate. What are those injuries? And is there things that we can do to prevent them? Risk management, not say take them away, but again, where is that risk management piece to it? And that goes into, especially down here in South Texas, we're dealing with the hottest June that we've ever had. We have the ability through Smartabase, before events even start, that we know the hydration of our candidates. And then within those algorithms, it's kicking out who is the high risk candidate that we need to watch out for. And then we implement Zephyr in there to watch live while the events are going on, ECTs. And our medics are getting notified when these ECTs are moving in certain directions. Not saying we're canceling training. We're not saying that we're stopping training. But what we're doing is we're mitigating the likelihood of an injury as best as we can to prevent something catastrophic from happening and still continue to train. Because down here, once a certain temperature hits, all training stops in AATC, minus special warfare, because we have waivers for that. But we're using technology and the ability to take data, utilizing databases such as Smartabase to make risk mitigation decisions.
Yeah. And that particular example was a really, really cool one. It's been great to share that with military organizations around, you identified a pretty significant problem. And one of the key factors in solving that problem was actually the data around it, showing you, okay, this is how many heat-related acute incidents we were having. You obviously understood the climate that you're in. You got technology that helped you measure before they went out to a training session where they're at, and then also track them throughout the training session to ensure that anyone who was at risk, you're monitoring closely, and then anyone who suddenly became an acute incident because it was such an extreme day. The data is really the critical piece of that. If you don't have that information, I think, the old look at a service member and gauge. Some people are really good at that, but it's not particularly scientific, and it's not always accurate. Whereas I think having that data and using that to solve that particular problem is a really good example of why data collection from day one is valuable. And then, you've showed return on investment by just reducing those number of acute incidents. And I think for anyone in leadership, that's going to be a powerful message to provide more value to the HPO programs moving forward.
Yeah. And one thing I'll also kind of hit on this, we've really focused, all the conversation on human performance. But when we look at this and what SmarterBase can do, we can take this outside the human performance spectrum. And I'll use examples like academics. All of our academics now go into SmarterBase within the pipeline. But the thing is that when we see failures, we have the ability to go back and look at the 5 days leading up to that academic test. What was their sleep? What was their hydration? What was their stress level? And so same thing with a lot of our flying operations, our parachuting operations. Those things are getting put into SmarterBase now. And a good example I'd like to use is we had an individual that had he had already been washed back once for climbing a rope ladder, and he was in his second class, and he was struggling again. And what we were able to do is physically we looked at his scores. There was no reason why he couldn't climb that rope ladder. Physically, he had it. It was a cognitive issue, and so we ended up putting a Zephyr puck on him, and what we saw was his heart rate, hovered right around 70, 75 beats until his name was called for that event, and then immediately shot up above 100. And by the time he got to the third rung of the rope ladder, he's sitting at 145, 150 beats a minute. So cognitively, he's shutting down. But because we had something like SmarterBase, we had the ability to go back and look at what was all this other data that's leading to this performance failure that isn't truly HP per se and that aspect of it, because we're using it in a non-traditional way. But those are the things that you can sit there and leverage something like SmarterBase into all other things. Weapons. All of our weapons training goes into SmarterBase. It's captured. So we can look at, over time, guys are shooting in a certain sequence, they're down and to the right. Okay, we see that over 2 or 3 months. How do we correct that? And so that's where I think, it gives us, as well as an amazing baseline. So we now finally have a true baseline of what guys look like when they came into service versus finally getting a set of blood markers on them after 10 years of being in the service going, okay, well, what was those blood markers look like when they first came in? And so those are things that within SmarterBase and looking at the technology and databases, this is not truly just a human performance database if you want to think outside the box and use it in other areas. And that's the beauty, I think, with SmarterBase compared to others, is that you can plug and play and create any type of a system that you want. But the luxury of that is it all comes back to the same one login location versus me having to log into 5 different systems to try to look at a holistic look at an individual should those challenges arise.
Yeah.
Yeah. I there's a few questions I'd love to throw in here. And Chief, you kind of brought up a lot of these kind of different applications that can be solved with this with SmarterBase. But my question is, take, for example, mission ready, and this idea of mission ready and not mission ready. I have to imagine that varies what that actually means and the factors that go into that, depending on the branch of the military and what actual unit you're in and what the role and responsibility of that given unit is. So I'd love if you guys could talk about kind of the different factors, or even just the metrics that wrap up into this larger idea of mission ready and the need and how we can be flexible with those depending on the needs of a given group.
Yeah, well, I guess I'll start it out. Mission ready really goes back to every unit, and within those jobs within the unit, they have their own requirements. I think the beauty of something such as SmarterBase is that you have that luxury of, looking at a unit as a whole and saying, okay, what's the mission ready of this unit? And let's just say it's 85%, which sounds pretty good. But then the beauty, then you can actually then look at the different jobs within that unit and go, well, wait a second, this job over here, they're only at a 37%. So again, when we look at things of, in my world, being a PJ and medical background, we always want to triage in any scene. And so now, instead of going, okay, we need to, focus on all these AFS or all these jobs, what you really need to do is you need to find out and you need to focus your resources on that job that's only sitting at a 30-some% mission ready rate to get them back up. So when we look at the mission ready piece, I think the way that it can be broken or built out within the Smartabase system, it really helps commanders focus on where are the challenges and where are the true organizations or jobs that need that extra focus to help get them above whatever your minimum mission ready rate is. Now, with that also being said, is you look at the next level of leadership above a squadron, that command has the ability with a simple click of a button, they can look at multiple units at the same time and see what across the board, what's the mission ready rate for those units as well. They don't have to call back down. They don't have to figure that they have it at their desktop. So when you look at the ability to say, okay, what's my mission ready rate? Now you also have, okay, if I have, let's just say a 65% rate, okay, what do I have over the next 14 days? What are the group of guys that are in the 14-day window, gals, that I need to get them healthy? Okay, so if something pops up, okay, within 2 weeks I can go from a 65 to an 82%. But this is what I need. I need a C-130 and I need 2 helicopters to be able to get all this training knocked out to get those individuals up. So it gives you that ability, that roadmap to show, how many do I have ready to go? What do I have that's in what we consider the yellow or the orange, which again, is within 14 days, we could get them up and out the door. And then what are my red guys that they're hard broke and we can't get them out the door. And so that's where I look at it as that capability through the data to show that, and again, focus on those assets that are really needing the most attention at this time to get them above that healthy line, and then try to keep them there.
Yeah, Chief, and I want to build on something you said there about, let's just say you do have a unit that is their mission ready stats are more like in the 30s or 40% as opposed to the 80s and 90s. And what's really interesting is, there could be so many factors that impact that. So it could be that, there is no HP support there and they're getting a lot of injuries. It could be that because it's a very specialized role, the demands of the job require someone to be more ready than potentially another unit. And I think that's something that we really want to continue to work on in Smartabase. And it's a data set that we are collecting in terms of what are the demands of each job, each role, what are we asking people to do? And then we can break those down into, okay, let's just say somebody has an upper body injury or a lower body injury. That could impact different roles in the military very, very differently. And so being able to break down each job basically into, okay, what are the requirements of this job? And what are the things that we commonly see that cause people to not be mission ready? Are we seeing a lot of back injuries? Are we seeing a lot of neck injuries? I mean, one of the things we hear a lot from the Air Force with fighter pilots is, the load on their neck and the issues that they have. That's not going to be the same issue at an infantry group in the Army, but sometimes we kind of take a blanket approach to the military of these are the types of factors that we should be looking out for, rather than, all right, with each job, we need to break down the demands of each of the jobs and understand what are the factors that are impacting mission readiness. In the same way that, like, you wouldn't assess a football player and a basketball player the same way because of the demands of their job, even within a football team. Different position groups, you've got different demands on the jobs that they do. And so I think what data helps you do, and again, systems like Smartabase, is that if you can define the job requirements of the role and then assess what are the biggest factors that impact mission readiness within those jobs, you can plan training better. again, you can implement strategies that not just get people back quicker from injury, but hopefully prevent those injuries. But without data, what we typically see is people just taking these blanket approaches of, okay, everybody is going to do the same strength programs. Everyone's going to do the same conditioning programs because that's just the easiest way to do it. So I think, to your point, I think understanding the specifics of each role, what are the biggest impactors on mission readiness, that's going to have a huge impact on the military moving forward. And obviously data is at the center of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Well, Dan, thank you for sharing the dashboard. We'll be sure that's made available if people would like to go back and refer to that. I'd love to talk a bit more about some of the challenges. So, we've painted this picture of the goals and now the technology and seen some of the actual metrics to visualize that. What are some of the challenges that you guys have seen in trying to implement this type of kind of rigor to be able to communicate ROI?
Yeah, well, one of the first challenges I think is that we dealt with. There's many companies that are out there saying that they have the ability to do this capability, and that is not true, especially within the military. Maybe in the civilian sector, they can, but when you start trying to get into the military sector and you're talking about clearances and you're talking about security of data, a lot of organizations that are out there just don't have that capability to do it. So I think one of our challenges at the beginning was we were utilizing other organizations or other companies that just did not meet the requirement that we were looking for. So understanding what your requirement is to then go out and find what is the true best solution. And I would really recommend, if you find an organization or a company that says that they do this, is okay, let me talk to your military clients so I can ensure, that what you're telling me you're capable of doing, I can get validated or be validated. Those can be validated by a true military asset that's utilizing that capability within your company. So I think, that's one. The other one, which we've hit on, is, again, defining what the true ROI is. What is success? We're doing I've listened to a lot of things regarding pilot programs. But one of the things that I think I've kind of taken from that is these pilot programs are being done, but there's no true definition of, okay, what was the success of the pilot program? And if the pilot program was successful, then what are the next steps to move it forward? And so again, look at these. The pilot programs are awesome. There's awesome grant money out there to do these things, but you need to look at this as, okay, what is success? And if it is successful, how are we truly going to move this to that next level to become full-time? My third area of challenges would be, again, going back to how fast that we could put a system out there. In the military, a lot of times, we do these 12-month contracts with option years, but the problem is that it takes 12 months just to really get a program in place, going, get everybody trained up and educated on it, versus, okay, hey, our first base year is going to be a 2 or a 3-year base year to really establish the program and then go into our options. Because the issue you run into when you do these 1 year with based option years is, again, leadership changes out, program leadership changes out, and they all are coming in to make a change because they think what they know is best. So when you have programs that are having to renew every 12 months when they're still in their very infancy, they're very easy to go, you know what, we don't like it, we don't believe in it, let's move on to something else. Now, I say that, H2F goes to something like Smarta Base. Again, it's more of a Pentagon-driven program, but there's a lot of units out there that are trying to do this and get ahead of it, instead of waiting for the big DoD to come out with it. And then my last thing that I would say when it comes to challenges and pitfalls is really go back to focusing on the individual that you're collecting data on. We did not do a good job on that. We looked at leadership and what could we use to justify the leadership that what was successful. And what we found was, the average military member right now, it just feels like a guinea pig anymore. There's so much technology and things that are happening out there that, especially within the special ops world, that every time they turn around, they're doing a study on X, Y, or Z, and they're not getting any data back. And they're like, well, what am I giving you all my information if I don't get anything in return? And so if you kind of take that mindset of what is the information that we want to provide? Well, first of all, what is the information the individual wants? How do we provide it to them? And then you get their buy-in. And the amount of buy-in that they have will automatically give you that data for the most part, probably 90% of the data you need to inform leadership on it. But if you focus on leadership and you try to collect the data for leadership, that individual, which is the true person that you're trying to improve and make their life better, they're not going to buy into the program. And you're now going to have a challenge of even collecting that data for leadership because it's all going to leadership and nothing's going back to them.
Yeah. Jim, I think you've pretty much ticked off the key challenges that I know you and I have seen in this space. I think to add to one of your points there, it's important to understand what you're actually trying to achieve, and whatever you're doing from a human performance perspective. But one of the things that we try to do as a company, consulting in this space, is help people understand what is the thing that you're trying to achieve? What is your HP program trying to achieve? And obviously with the training wing, Chief, it's about, improving the efficiency of the pipeline, getting people through quicker. But at an operational unit, it's a different challenge. And so the data that you all collect might be really, really similar, but the way that we need to visualize that data and report it and the outcomes that we're trying to demonstrate are going to be different. And so instead of one of the things I see a lot is people buy a bunch of technology and then they try to figure out how that fits, rather than starting with, okay, what are we trying to achieve with our program? What are the problems, challenges we face, and what are the technologies that are going to help solve it? And going back to your example earlier, you saw that a big impactor on the pipeline efficiency was heat related issues, acute incidents. And so you saw the issue, you found two technologies in Smarterbase and Zephyr that helped in resolving that, and then you implemented them and solved a problem. So that would be my one thing for adding on to everything that you've just said is really understanding whether it's an individual unit or it's a force-wide implementation is what are the challenges that you're facing and the problems you're trying to solve, and then building a system like Smarterbase and the technology that supports it or underpins it based on that.
Yeah, and Chief, you'd mentioned, both kind of in your introduction, a lot of the programs that you came in and helped start, and then you also just kind of talked a little bit about some pilot programs and some of the challenges there. If you were to give one piece of advice for somebody who's in the midst of starting or launching a pilot program, what would that be?
So the one piece would be a strong roadmap with leadership's buy-in and commitment to a timeline to achieve that roadmap goal.
Tell me a little bit more about kind of the roadmap, and I assume this
Well,
break down into kind of individual years and more digestible ROI.
Yeah. So again, looking at ultimately, my task was to create a program that will increase production in the follow-on courses. So I knew, okay, here was my applied task. Now, how do I build a roadmap to get that to that goal, which was at the time, all I had to do is produce more people on the next course, which was a selection course. We looked at it, whether we did a roadmap of, okay, if we do this over a 6-week period, over a 10-week period, and what we ended up settling down on was, okay, we need 9 weeks. 9 weeks to achieve the goal that we wanted if we receive someone that looks like X, to get them to look like Y before they go into a selection course. And so now that we had that roadmap of what that looks like, and that included, okay, in the first course, we're going to do this. We're only going to collect data. The second course, we're going to collect data, but we're going to give them tablets to be able to help provide that objective data. And the third course, we're going to do, those two things, and then we're going to add a megawave. So having that to where when I say you're road mapping this out is, what does this look like over your timeline that you're given, to say, okay, here's what it looks like. Here's my implementation plan. Here's my scalability plan. Because again, when we started this, the very first class was 52 people. We now run 220 people. Well, 52 people is really easy to do all this technology and everything with, compared to, because at the time they hired enough people for a 200 plus person class. So now we're like, oh, this is easy. We can add more and more things to things. But what happened is that as we added more and more candidates, that time we lost. And what used to take 3 hours to do now takes 10 hours to do. And how do we efficiently do that? So if you don't scale that out, if you don't build it out looking at what your ultimate goal is, I want to run 220 people every 9 weeks through a program 6 times a year, then you're going to end up running into huge roadblocks and failures. And if leadership is not agreeing with you, then that's where you're really going to have problems. And that's what happened with us. Our 06 had an idea. He had a vision, unbelievable vision. And he said, go do. Well, the 1-star general found out, and he was not very happy. And we got summoned to go to his office out of state. And we showed up there. Well, his goal at the beginning of that meeting was he was going to tell us to shut it all down and that he knew what was best. And he was going to go ahead and tell us what we were going to do. But because we were able to show him the strategic roadmap and how this will benefit, by the end of that meeting, he said, you have 100% of my blessing, go do. So again, we now had the 1-star also backing us up on this, which he had all the right to shut it down if you so choose. So this is where it goes back into is you don't have your leadership, your 06s, your 07s, 08s behind you, you're going to end up running into problems because you can fund this at the unit level for only so long. But you have to get this into your palm. You have to get this up into a program of record. So when you do have a commander that comes in and doesn't see the benefits of this, is the old school mindset of, well, all they need is a 5-gallon jerry can and a 50-pound ruck. They don't have that ability to pull those programs out and change things because it's a program of record.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that roadmap really helps not just educate, but also manage expectations and build champions.
Yes. The other thing I will say, and again, I know you told me one, but I want to also bring this up too, is technology is moving rapidly. We are literally creating technology and capabilities faster than I think iPhone comes out every September. We're doing the same thing in all this technology world. It is a challenge to take this technology and provide it to a strength coach and say, here you go, implement this and actually get the full capabilities of that device and that data out of it. So having the ability to do something like Smartabase to where that feeds in there, as well as one of our things that we have is we have a company that manages all this stuff for us that works with Fusion Sport to ensure that the technology is being utilized correctly. It's being troubleshot if there's any issues with it. The data is being downloaded in a timely manner and reports are being built off for the actual HP staff to react to real time. And so when we look at this is, I was with a Ranger bat a couple years ago, and I just got in given a talk about ECT, and they came down afterwards and they said, we literally have 15 sets of Zephyr sitting in a closet because none of us knew that was even capable with the Zephyr system. And I've heard that with a Megawave, and I've heard this with some other technologies that we're using. By finding an organization like Guardian Pure Solutions, that they literally have people that's their specialty, that can be on your staff as part of your augmented HP staff, you are going to be able to collect data like you've never been able to collect. Your coaching staff can do their thing. And a good example is this. A strength coach can provide nutritional education. It can provide cognitive and resiliency education. It can provide rehab education. But at the end of the day, does that coach replace a nutritionist on your organization? Does it replace a physical therapist or an AT? Does it replace a psychologist? Absolutely not. So when you look at these programs, because technology is becoming so complex, having the ability to have someone that's there that can focus on that area for your HP team, work with organizations such as Fusion Sport, it's going to end up increasing your ROI drastically.
Great. Well, we are up on time, and I just, want to thank you guys both for the conversation and the perspective. If anyone listening would like to get in touch with you, what would be the best way? Dan, let's start with you.
Yeah, sure. Email is best for me. So that's dan.duffield@fusionsport.com, or you could also find me on LinkedIn.
For me, email is the best, and that's S as in Sam, M as in Mike, I as in India, T as in Tango, 229@icloud.com.
All right, great. Well, guys, thank you so much. This will be available for the public, and we'll also make that the dashboard available. And if there's any questions that people have, please reach out. I know both Dan and Chief really enjoy digging into this topic, so I'm sure they'd be happy to answer some follow-up questions. So, all right, thank you.
Thank you.